Good evening, everybody. Hi, my name is Aaron Alpern. I am a theater professor and the program coordinator at Miami-Dade College Kendall campus. And with us today, we have the cast of The Diary of Anne Frank, and which we are currently doing, and we have another performance this Friday in the morning and the evening. And then also with us, a special guest, Danny Reed, who is the educational director of the Holocaust Museum Memorial on Miami Beach. Danny, thank you so much for being with us tonight and talking to us. If you could help explain how Anne's story fits into the larger history of the Holocaust.
Wow, that's a big ask, but a couple of things, because when you usually when you think of the Holocaust, Anne Frank is one of the first things that pops up in your head. In school, it's one of the first books that you read about the Holocaust. In middle school, there have been there's the play that you all performed beautifully, and several movies and adaptions of it. But the reality, and she's become kind of like a symbol for the Holocaust, a human symbol. But the reality is her story is really only one very, very small part of the Holocaust. And in a way, even though she's a symbol of hope, it's a tragic part, because the end result is that yes, her and her family and the others are hidden by Miep and others and protected, but in the end they're betrayed. And in the end, and I don't know if you saw any movies or anything, but usually what's portrayed are German soldiers coming to arrest them. Yeah. The reality is that it was Dutch police that came to arrest them with a Gestapo officer. So part of the truth is, part of the reality is that the Holocaust could not have occurred in all the countries that the Germans occupied during World War II if it hadn't been for the collaboration of police or paramilitary or other groups in the different countries. So, the place that she has in Holocaust memory is an important one, but it's one very, very small part of, I would say, the unprecedentedness, if you can, for want of a word, of what happened during World War II. Right? When you had what was, prior to World War II, what was considered one of the most advanced countries in Europe, everybody looked to Germany for culture, for music, for art, for philosophy, for medicine. I can go on and on and on and on. And all of now we're in the 21st century, but all of the advantages of a modern nation state as developed, in the 20th century. A regime arose in a modern country that turned all of its focus while it was fighting a war to putting equal effort, even when they were losing the war, to putting equal effort into exterminating one people and using all the processes of a modern government. Right? The police, the transportation ministry, the economic ministry. I can go on and on. And what happened to Anne and her family, in the end, what happened to them is what happened to every Jew, regardless of age, sex, gender, you name it, that was caught up in the Nazi regime. And so it's a very unique, even though it's been universalized, it's an extremely unique story in that it's one microcosm of what happened during the Holocaust. It's also, I think, for us, living in a Western democracy, or for any country for that matter, there's a message there. There's a universal message too. um, and it's a warning, and it's a responsibility for all of us of what it means to live in a civil society, and the part that we all have to play in in living in a civil society. One of the volunteers, one of the Holocaust survivor volunteers, Joe Sachs, who basically survived about 4 or 5 years in slave labor concentration camps and factories in Poland. He passed away last summer. Great guy. And when he spoke to students and when he spoke to other groups, his end message after telling his story is make the world a better place, right? What I went through, what my family went through, it's your job now to make the world a better place and ensure that that doesn't happen again. So while in its uniqueness and unprecedentedness, the Holocaust is important to learn about, and that's part of Anne's story, and that's part of the importance of telling her story. Is also what we learn from it, what we learn from her experience and all the other survivors as well.
You spoke at the beginning, you said, there was the Dutch police and that all of these different people allowed the Holocaust to happen, enabled the Holocaust to happen. And Anne's story also shows us people that actively were fighting against it, that there were people that gave into it or enabled it, but there were also people who valiantly fought against a losing battle at that time, but still.
And that's extremely important as well. I mean, just by, I guess, coincidence, my wife is Dutch, and her grandparents lived in a town in southern Holland, and they hid Jews. They were part of the resistance. They hid Jews. So they even, I don't know if you heard about this, but in Yad Vashem, which is the Holocaust Museum and Research Center in Israel, they honor what they call righteous amongst the nations. Those are Gentiles or non-Jews that during the war hid Jews, and not for monetary gain. There's plenty of examples of people who hid Jews for monetary gain, but ones who did it because it was the right thing to do. And there are thousands of stories, tens of thousands of stories like that, from Meep and the Anne Frank story to there's a whole village in the mountains in France, Le Chambeau, I think. I'm probably massacring their name, but it was a village, a very, very rural village, Protestant, French Protestants who hid hundreds of Jews to, lots of individuals in Poland as well. And, and that's not to say that it's not to say that everybody who didn't do anything, who stood by, were responsible for what happened. That's brought up a lot, and I always bring up the fact, well, if my name is Johan and I'm 30 something, I have a wife and 3 kids, and I know what's happening to my Jewish neighbor is wrong. But if I do something, I'm risking my life, my wife's life, my children's life, maybe my whole village. So a lot of people won't do that, won't take that step. A lot of people are cowed into, or just, their first instinct is to protect their own. So in order to step out of that and actually do something more, that takes astounding faith and astounding courage, I think.
Thank you for giving us that perspective. And I think it's always tempting to think, okay, what would I do in this circumstance? But it also is sort of almost unimaginable to put those kind of pressures on oneself and to see how you would really handle it.
And I mean, you're all actors. You portrayed parts, but you portrayed fictionalized imaginings of these people, how they were, how they acted, how they survived. 2.5 years in the attic. Um, so I try in all my educational efforts and also with myself. Um, I try not to say imagine if, because there's absolutely no way that any of us can imagine or put ourselves in their place. One of our Holocaust survivor volunteers um, hid in a closet with his mother for 2 years, like a wardrobe in an office building. And it was in Warsaw, and his father managed to get false papers for himself, had a nose job done without anesthesia, so he would have a more Gentile looking nose, dyed his hair blonde, was very educated, so spoke German and Polish fluently without an accent, and rented an office in a building and created a fake company and hid his wife and child in the closet. So during the day, they had to hide in the closet. At night, when everybody went home, oh, and there was a German office in the same building. So, you know, you, I asked, like, how did you survive that? He said, we played imaginary games. If we had to cough, we had a pillow, we would cough into the pillow. He said, I spent 2 years playing cat's cradle with my mother in the dark. I don't know if you know what that is. It's like a string game.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's, you know, I couldn't even imagine. Who can imagine, like, or think about how you would put yourself in their places, and the same person came here, went to Beach High actually, and back in the 50s, graduated, became a lawyer, and speaks to groups now about his experiences. And of course, what his lesson is the same as basically Joe Sachs. Um, citizenship is especially in a Western democracy, or I mean, we're a republic, but even so, citizenship shouldn't be passive; it should be active. And by that, I'm not saying go out on the streets all the time. I'm just saying you have to be conscious of what is going on around you all the time.
Absolutely. So I'm going to look. I have the chat going from the audience. I'm going to look at that for questions and
Sure.
give you everyone a chance to ask questions. And also, I want the cast to feel free to ask Mr. Reed questions if you have them as well. But before I get to any of that, I want to ask the cast what this experience of trying to play these people and connect to a real event was like for you. What did you learn? What did you experience? What was this like for you? Miles, you have your hand up. Why don't you go ahead and start us off? And I'd like to hear from everybody just a little bit, if I could.
Well, from my experience doing this, I thought it was really quite enjoyable because I read the story, as said, growing up in elementary school, reading the story before, and then getting the chance to pick this historical character in the story and relive the story of it. It was very like life changing and very also emotional for me because I've done like some facts about this and just going over it just to make sure I know this is the exact same story I read before I was a kid to now doing this on stage virtually. And it's like a really good experience for me as an up and coming actor about this and learning and knowing the back history of the Franks and memes, the Van Dams and stuff like that is really it's very incredible and very it's important to us to know about their story, how they came up to be, how they lived their life before they tried to before they had perished, and I just thought it was a really good experience and very great opportunity for me to be a part of this play along with my cast members here.
Awesome. Would anyone else like to share about what it was like for you? Go ahead, Lewis. You play Peter, and Kevin, I saw your hand go up. I'll come to you.
Yes. Hi. Yeah, I played Peter Van Dan, and for me, well, I grew up in Venezuela, obviously, and obviously I knew about the Holocaust and I knew about Anne Frank, but I never actually read the book when I was a child, so I didn't have that much information going into this. But when I started doing it and I started learning about Anne Frank and the other characters, I read the diary, and it made me like it's such a crazy thing to actually, because you see, when you think about Anne Frank, it's just like, yeah, Anne Frank, the girl that hid in the annex for 2 or 3 years during the Holocaust. But when you read the diary and you read the play and you play the characters and you feel what they feel, you realize that those were like people. And I feel like that's what happened to me with my character with Peter, because Peter was a person, like, from what I've learned on the play and on the diary, he was a person that was really similar to me. So that felt kind of connecting with the person, and him actually being a person that existed is kind of crazy to
me. Kevin, you had your hand up. Did you want to say something?
Yeah. Same thing with Lewis. When I was growing up, I never really read the story because my school didn't really read the more mature topics. So this was my first time hearing the story. I knew obviously of Anne Frank. Most people know of Anne Frank and like the whole story. But getting to play the character, Mr. Van Dam, it was interesting because this is my, like, I'd say this is like one of my first big roles. And I really finally got to like become a character, and reading up on Mr. Van Dam and like seeing and like just feeling the emotions and seeing the situation that they were in. Like, it makes you feel for the character, and it makes the emotions more real when you act. So it helps push the show even further. And I think it was a really just mind-jarring experience, and I was really excited and happy that I got to do it.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm looking at the chat to see if we had any questions, and it looked like there was some erroneous response put in about saying that we were better to answer the questions, and that's not at all the case. I would love to get questions from anybody who's watching us. But while I'm waiting for those questions, I do want to hear from you folks. Shalene, your hand is up, and Gabby, are you indicating you'd like to talk? Great, awesome.
Lannis had hers first.
Oh,
yeah,
well, please.
Lannis was first.
Please.
Mm-hmm.
Mrs. Van Dan, and for me it was really interesting feeling the loss of everything that my character went through, because she was someone who loved the fancier things and giving those things up, and really realizing what certain things meant to her that to other people seemed dumb, and also seeing that feeling of losing someone you love, because she loved Mr. Van Dan so much. And through the years there, they kind of just grow apart and grow to despise each other a little bit, and they're constantly fighting. And it's really sad that their last couple of years together were so miserable when they loved each other so much at first.
Awesome. Thank you. Shalene, you wanted to say something?
Yes. I play Mr. Kruller. I actually looked up Mr. Kruller. He was obviously one of the people that helped Anne Frank, and I read a little bit more about his story, and I kind of got more in touch with his story. It's really sad how that this whole story played out. Mr. Kruller was a man that knew Otto Frank. You know, he knew him very close and very tight, and so he hid him in his office with me, of course. And seeing him playing, even though, you know, sorry, but Mr. Kraler, he's just doing it because he thinks it's the right thing to do. You know, hiding Jews so they won't be killed and sent off to trains and to very vicious like places in Germany during the Third Reich. And this story is a very similar story to another story that I read. It's called Korzak's Children. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's a play that taken place in 1943, around the same time as World War II, but it's about a Jewish orphanage. And I see the similarities in both, and saying that the adults are the most stressed out while the children are there in their own land. They know what's going on, but like they're going, they're just imagining like everything's gonna be all right, everything's gonna be all right. But all the adults know that there's imminent doom that's waiting for them one step at the door. And sorry. And this play just opens eyes to everybody. And that's my experience.
So one question that we have, and I will get back to the cast because I'd like to hear from everybody. But one question in the chat from Henry Noy was, how prevalent were German resistant groups that hid Jews within Germany?
In Germany itself, well, there were two types of resistance groups, and they were very, very, very small. There probably were some instances of Jews being hidden inside Germany by Germans during the war. There were a few. I know a story of somebody who managed to survive in Berlin during the whole war. Hidden from place to place and sometimes on false papers. There was also students, college students. There was a small resistance group called the White Rose Society. And but they were found out and they were betrayed and they were all arrested and they were executed. So the resistance groups were usually inside Germany itself especially by the time the war started. Were down to like very tiny groups like the White Rose or even other individual acts and usually it was maybe writing things against the regime. There really wasn't any armed resistance or anything like that. I mean, the Nazis, when they took power, basically spent the whole of the 1930s seizing complete control, right? And right, one party state, no other political parties. If you were a socialist or a Social Democrat or any other party, you kept silent, right? You were either sent to concentration camps. Remember, before the war, concentration camps were primarily for political prisoners, right, against the regime, not just Jews. So it was small, it was tiny, but there were a few instances.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate that. Gabby, I know that you wanted to say something.
Hi. Sorry, my mom was just like bubbling around in the back. So hi, I play Margot Frank. This play has been really different considering we are playing real people. So there was a lot of research that had to go into portraying all of our characters in a respectful way, in a way to honor them. You really can't just play a character that actually lived and was a human person just the way that we normally do from plays of people who are completely fabricated. A lot of research had to go into me trying to build around Margot because there wasn't a lot left of her actually. And reading up on her it's really painful because she did so much right. She was like the best of her class. She learned Dutch so quickly and she didn't have an accent and she did so well in all of her classes. She did athletics. She was in a rowing team. She did tennis and ice skating. And when you think about how she left, she just wanted someone of her own and she never really got that. And I think about that so often. It's really, you really can't play any real person who lived through something like this without feeling and portraying that pain. It's necessary that you feel it, especially for a play like this. And in a time like this, it's just scary. And that was the hurdle that I had to get over to portray Margot. That was all that I really wanted to share.
Thank you. Miles, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, so for my character, Mr. Dussel, my apologies for not saying my character's name. For him, is I feel like it's a real him is like very, I guess, very, I would say special in my opinion, because he just like this very like introverted character. Like he just like he's like feels like his life is being ripped away or something like that because he's a dentist and he's separated from his loved one and with everything's going on around with the war and stuff like that, it's very like very heartbroken and very scary. And I can see that for me though, if I had like a time machine to go back to this time to see what was going on and actually feel how the people around that time was living, I would definitely feel very sad and very scary about it, and just like I was just worried about like when is this going to be over? Like, is there happiness along this road or wherever the case may be? And for this character, I like this character so much because after I've done my whole research about him from the first day of rehearsal to now, I can definitely see why he feels like this, why he's like so introverted, why he's not feel like he's not himself. And from it takes a weird lot for me to like try and get divulge into that character to bring it to make it the best out of it.
Awesome. I think one of the reasons that I chose this story to do, and it had been a play that I've been looking to do for a while. Maria Alexia knows that. But I felt like there was something special about doing this story the way that we're doing it, from our own homes. And the seclusion that we've all been feeling, and we are not living through anything like the Holocaust. No, by no means do I mean to say that. But I think the experience that we're living through does give us perhaps a different way to connect to this story than we had before, or maybe allows us to hear and see it a little bit with fresh eyes and ears. Let me ask the cast members who haven't spoken just to talk a little bit about their experience. Yes, please, Maria Alexia and Alex and Ali, I want to hear from you too.
Okay, hi, I'm Maria Alexia, or people know me as Memes. I could actually take my mask off because nobody's here. I don't know why I had it on. So I played Anne. It was difficult. It still is difficult, and I don't think I can't sit here and tell you like it's easy to play a character that was alive and somebody that like it's recognized as a symbol of the Holocaust, even if she's like just one of the stories of everything that happened. It's trying to bring a character like to life like that, like it was something I had never done or even thought of. I never saw myself playing Anne Frank. But I did a lot of research and I kept having to tell myself that these were all real people that have feelings and they want to play, they want to eat, they want to enjoy great things. And actually, like Alpern was saying, connecting it to our experience now and even other hardships that I've had when I lived back in DR. With my family, seeing my mom go through similar things that Mrs. Van Dan went through with having to let go of things while being like in a really good place and then losing a lot it's totally different scenarios. But I really had to kind of like look at everything around me besides the research and what we know about Anne Frank and really just see it as it's this person, it's this family, and try to establish my connections with each person, each character in the cast, and really build on that and allow the words which are there just affect me and understand that these there's only so much that we do know, like Margaret said, like you can research, but at the end of the day, to honor them and to be truthful, it's really about being in the moment and understanding that there are different levels to them. And I every day I keep being curious and learning more, and connecting with my castmates, with Anne. I still, like, sometimes I go back to like the diary and I just read a passage and it gives me an idea of how she was feeling and what was going on. And that really fuels me to understand that how I should portray her, and to allow kind of like myself to channel Anne and channel Maria Alexia and channel the humanity into these characters that we sometimes think, oh, I have to act this way. Like, you need to do, and you need to be present, and that way it's more honest, and people actually relate to that and they see that on stage and feel something. So it's definitely been an amazing experience, and one that's opened my eyes. And part of that, like Mr. Reed said, is like we can't even imagine what it was like being there, living through that. And I had to kind of just say, like, okay, yes, you don't have any of these things. What do you have, and how can we make this like come through, especially with Zoom? Like, we have technology and we have this device in front of us separating us even more, but how can we use that and each other? So it was definitely a very interesting experience that I'm very grateful for.
We got a question from Mia Nunez, who said that she's a big fan of Anne Frank and is interested in the war during this time. And I always ask everyone I meet, who do you believe betrayed the Franks? And so she wanted to ask that here. And do we know, Danny, specifically?
No, I've read stuff where they suspect it's possibly one of the workers in the factory.
There's a mention of that in the script where
right, but nobody's ever been identified. I mean, that's the most likely scenario.
Micah, you haven't said anything yet. What was this like for you?
I was just waiting for whoever wanted to go first. Okay, so I think honestly this was like it was like mind blowing. Like every time we would meet for rehearsal and like read through the script, I know my character, I played Meep. She didn't have much like to say in the play, but like everything she'd say was like mainly important. Like if she'd come for like a few minutes, she'd make sure that like every single person that was there was like taken care of, or if they needed something, she'd be there. So I feel like I kind of relate to her because I'm usually that friend that'll always send a text to someone, like make sure they're okay. Like if they need anything, I'm like, I'm here. Like I promise I'm here to help no matter what. And I guess I feel like the Holocaust is something that always like gets me every time because I've seen so many movies, like The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, all those movies, and it's like you can never, like how everyone said, you can never imagine what they went through. And I was doing a bunch of research like the other day. I stayed up till like 3 a.m. like just going more into detail about like the family and everything. And it said that Meep tried to buy the Franks and like Van Dan's freedom because they were going to take her, but she met with a police officer who was also Dutch, and he just let her go. But she tried to pay the officer to let them go, but they didn't budge. So it's like I feel like it's a big thing. Like even though she wasn't in the annex, it's still a big piece of her because for over 2 years she helped them get their food, everything that they needed, make sure that they weren't hurt and stuff. So it's like knowing that she made it out and she lived to 100 years old, I believe. 100.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
She died in, I forgot what year, but it wasn't too long ago. But I have the same birthday as her, so I was like, wow, this is freaky, but okay. But I feel like that's just like a big piece of her, knowing that she was able to live on for so long and she was so close to getting them to their back to their freedom and their like normal lives. So I feel like it's very tough. So
You know, there were a lot of moments in the play that really struck with me watching it. And like I've already said, I really enjoyed the work that all of you have done. But the moment when Meep shows up and the excitement that everybody has, I think you as a group create that reality so well together, all in your own homes. There's this palpable feeling of all the possibility, hope, and excitement that Meep's entrance brings with her. So yes, go ahead, Alex. And I have another question that I want to ask from the chat after we hear from you, sir.
So yes, my name's Alex and I play Otto Frank, Mr. Frank. And I will say this was certainly unique in the sense that this was the first role that I get to play someone that's real. That seems to be the general consensus right now throughout the entire through the entire interview. But most of all of my previous roles have always been fictional characters, and I had, playing fictional characters, you more or less have the creative, you have more creativity with that. But now when you're playing someone real, especially someone that's gone through, someone that's been through the Holocaust, and not only that, was the only person in his family to survive the Holocaust, it was very, very, the word that's coming to my mind right now is tough, because, trying to portray Mr. Frank, the one thing I had in mind was, again, the general consensus seems to be that, we're trying to honor all these real people that we're just portraying. And that was my number one goal in mind, to try and, honor Otto Frank as much as I can. But man, that, I how do I say this? I'm playing a father that loses his wife and his two daughters. Granted, that's later on, when he comes out of the concentration camp. But it's unfathomable, at least to me, to put yourself in that position and think how you would react into such a hard time for Jewish people in the 40s. It's unfathomable, at least to me, to think in that way, to all right, how am I gonna pretend to be in the Holocaust? You can't do that. You can't do that. So I tried looking into, I did research Mr. Frank, and I tried grabbing onto attributes that he and I more or less shared, and he was more or less, he was more of the glue to the entire attic. He tried to be the middle ground for everyone whenever there's some disagreement or something like that, and I used to be like that. I still am, but not as much. But I used to be that type of glue where I try to alleviate any situation. I try to find some common ground and be like, hey, let's try and find something where we can all agree on before we start pulling each other's hairs out. And I will say probably one of the most toughest challenge I've had was certainly the ending monologue for Mr. Frank. That was hard, because I didn't know how I could pull that off without, at least for me, I was very worried and not doing right, at least by not only the message, but by also Otto Frank. And so it was really tough trying to portray someone that was real and someone that went through these hardships, so yeah.
And there's a couple things I want to talk to everybody about, but Alex, you were very skeptical when we started this process.
Yeah,
so
I was.
I have to ask you now, and you can be honest, what was it like coming through the other end? You didn't want to be a Zoom performer.
Initially, no. I was very skeptical. You are definitely correct. I was very iffy about it because, I personally, and I think everyone can agree with this, theater does not belong on a camera, whether it's on a phone or a laptop. Doesn't belong. It belongs on stage. It belongs with an audience. It belongs with actors and actresses where you can, bounce off, for each performance. It's really difficult trying to, look to your left and right. And, I have like a cardboard box that I'm looking at for, I don't say Morgan, and I have a little shelf here for Anne. It's hard to be so, touching and emotional at the same time when I'm just looking at a piece of wood. So, but coming out of it, I will say this, and take it for what you will, but I do truly wish that this was a in-person show. It's just like, I don't know, like, I guess how do I say this? There's just something different when it's an actual theater performance. Not saying this isn't actual, but like an in-person. Sorry, let me reword that. An in-person, show and a camera, Zoom show. What we did was great with what we can do with what we had. We utilized that to our fullest advantage, and that's great. And I just wish this would have been in person, because I just feel like it could have been. I don't know. It just could have been. It's, I don't know how to say it. I guess the human factor in terms of like just being there, being there in person.
In person. But the thing I'll say from watching it is that you all are being there and being there together separately in your own places. And the way that you're able to do that I see each of you being able to do that, is listening and responding. And you can't see each other so much because of the nature of the technology that we're dealing with. And that is frustrating, and you lose that. But you have to lean in to really listening and really genuinely responding.
How long did you rehearse? Because it seemed from what I saw, it was very natural how you were responding to each other.
How long we rehearsed? A good amount of time.
I think you guys started sort of middle to end of February. Is that right?
Something like that. And
Yeah.
not only did we rehearse on our mandatory rehearsal days, but we also had to rehearse, off,
Like group sessions.
outside of that, our own little custom group
so
sessions.
I gotta tell a little tale out of school. And yes, chat, I will get to your questions, and I do want to hear your questions, but I have to tell this. So we had a Zoom rehearsal for them that was sort of open, and they would show up whenever. And James, the director, who was going to be here, but I guess wasn't able to make it, would just jump on in. He'd have his computer on and he'd join people. But what none of you guys know is that my phone chirps when there's a Zoom rehearsal and it says, Alex just entered your rehearsal. And I'd see like it's 12 o'clock at night and they're rehearsing. And, I always appreciated that. And it made me very proud.
We took this serious. Like we know that this was going to be like our big thing going on, despite being on Zoom. But we want to make sure this play was really good, so everyone can like enjoy it, can see us really putting that maximum effort into these characters that we're doing. So,
Maria Alexia, you have your hand up, and then I want to get to Ms. Cruz. I'll say it super fast because I'm dying to hear Ali. She's like, ugh. So I just want to say, like, we really have tried everything. This was a huge experiment. I think everybody that tries to do anything on Zoom is really ballsy, and I give you all the props in the world because it's hard. And Emily, who did OBS,
yes,
and Emily and Caroline.
Yeah, Emily and Caroline. They're the G's of this. They're our superheroes right there. For making all this stuff possible.
Here.
honestly,
Thank
like
you.
without everybody's work together, it would have been really difficult. Like I still struggle. I practice in my shower. I'm like, Peter's over here. I'm in my sleep and I wake up thinking that I'm not looking at the right person. I'm not on time. Or it really, I know we made maps with papers in some of our rooms. I have my script. Looks like it's just stage directions. I think I've never written down my entrances as much as I have for this play, and I'm not even getting out of my chair. It's ridiculous.
I just go on instincts.
It really, James, our director, mentioned to us something about theater for the blind, and in a way, and I learned this also through other professors. Like all my professors are like masters that have passed me on awesome information. That when you cut an actor off from something, like you say, no, you can't do that, or you can only do this. They have to get really creative with how they're gonna interpret that, like how that message is going to come through. So I can't see you, I can't touch you, I can barely hear you sometimes because of Zoom, but I have to make it believable. So you really have to pick at yourself and try to put yourself in a way that I don't know if I might have achieved that in the same manner if I was in person. So I've grown so much as an actor, and now these are tools that I feel like I'm gonna take with me when I'm actually on stage. And I'm really well self-aware. I feel like you're your stage manager, you're your prop person, you have to be very involved and very aware. And those are things that I think are great qualities to take moving forward, because now theater isn't going to be what it used to be. It's going to be a lot. I at least I feel like it's becoming something different. So yeah, I think that all these rehearsals that we had, all this crazy looking around and trying to figure out, oh, I'm looking to the wrong side. It's all gonna come in handy, guys. Just saying.
Crash.
Awesome. So, Alex, I see your hand up, and I have not neglected
Right.
the questions on the
You do the questions. You
the
do the
chat.
questions first.
Yeah,
Well,
Ali has.
I'm going to put a question out there, but then I'm going to go to Ali, and I'll let you think about this. But I have from Henry Noy again. He has a question for the cast. Was there a particular scene that struck a chord or has stuck with you? So think about that while we get to hear from Ali, who played Mrs. Frank. I have a lot of things I want to know about your experience.
Well, I mean, as far as my relationship to the play and just the characters in general, I think Danny said earlier that Anne Frank is kind of like a symbol of the Holocaust. And on a certain level, I agree, just because I think youth is so stubborn in all contexts against oppression, against this kind of choking sense of repression. And I think that's what makes Anne Frank so wonderful and beautiful, and also a great tool to share this knowledge, because we can't forget about these historical instances. We have to remember as human people. So I think that's one of the beautiful things about Anne Frank, is that in the midst of, yes, this real life tragedy, this real life horror, these people are trying their best to be there for each other, to help each other grow, to support each other until they locate their freedom. And they're privileged among many, as the Franks are, and the Van Dans are. But I think what's so valuable for me about this story is that I researched Edith Frank, and the characters and everything. But to me, what was more important than trying to replicate who exactly this person was, because I'll never know, is to really think about, well, what would my mom be like in this situation? Who would I be if I had to confront these things, because I can never replicate the moment of the past. So for me, the relationships with the others were very, very important in finding that, because they are the story. Our relationships together is the story, and human story in general is relationship, the way we nourish each other or hurt each other. And I think that's why that transition, that scene, where it goes from everyone, this mob led by Edith Frank, being incredibly angry at Herman Van Dan for stealing food from us when we're all desperate to survive. And Meep comes in and immediate shift. The world has turned 180 degrees, you know? And that's so often life. And I know it's a dramatic heightening of those circumstances. And, you know, it's another incarnation of Anne Frank. But I think those moments are what resonate with audiences for stories like these. And again, like everybody says, these are real people who lived real experiences. So I think maybe not replicating their real life embodiment, but understanding that this story represents something that is true. And this story represents not just one or two families, but masses of people, not just in, you know, the Holocaust that under the Third Reich in Germany, but all those instances of organized human hate. We need to be aware of those. We need to talk about these stories, and not just in the way of, oh, how tragic, how sad, but really underline the human element of survival and, you know, love, so that we can not do this stuff, you know. So that's my thoughts.
Well, you articulated almost the point of view that I really wanted to hear from you, because ever since I knew you from the first theater appreciation class you took from me, I knew that you were a very bright and politically motivated young person. And I wanted to see how that manifested with this play, and how it was as an actor for you to sort of be able to tap into that energy that other plays won't afford you as an actor necessarily.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And what I think is interesting is because you express very passionately that political point of view that underlines this story, which I think Mr. Reed talked to us about, which was the responsibility of citizenship. But what I got so strong from you, and you mentioned it very clearly, is what would my mother be? Because, and I didn't know it was your mother, but I knew me as a parent, and just the wincing at one's child saying something inappropriate and trying to contain what you want to say, but know that you can't. And it was like to recognize that in somebody so young, I thought was really impressive. So we have just a few minutes. I do want to wrap this up in 4 minutes. So will we ever redo this play once COVID is over? Who knows? A huge question, why is the guy in the middle laughing when everyone else is crying? You know, we all have our own responses.
In the middle?
What middle guy?
Yeah, I'm not even sure if everyone's seeing it the same.
What was the question about our favorite scenes in the?
Yeah, there was a question about what scenes touched you. So why don't we just really quickly go around and people briefly say that, because I do want to sort of wrap it up in just a few minutes. So go ahead, Miles, you have your hand up, and yeah. I'll tell you what, I'm just gonna go around in a circle. But go ahead, Miles, you're in the center of the circle. Start us off.
I guess in my scene is probably the bedroom scene between Mr. Dussel and Anne. Something about it, because not only because me and Means, we rehearsed this for a long time now, but I don't know, it kind of like just gets me right there. Like as soon as we rehearse that scene and we do it live, it's like that. I just connect with it. So yeah, that's my favorite scene.
Awesome. There were some other hands. Let's go ahead and we'll start with Lewis, and I'm just going to go around the circle. So we'll go up to Kevin, and then Meep and Mary Alexia and Alex and Alanis and Alicia, and then end with Gabby. So go ahead, Lewis, start us off.
Well, my favorite scene, and it's super biased because I rehearsed it so much also with memes, it was the attic scene, the kiss scene. And it was because, you know, I feel like Anne and Peter are so different characters, but because they're put in the situation, they can meet each other and realize that they have, you know, maybe not love, but appreciation for each other. And, you know, that connection could have never been found if they were outside of the annex. And of course, they were put in this horrible situation, but something beautiful came out of that.
Awesome. Kevin, how about for you?
I'm usually a person that can disassociate feelings in a play from feelings in real life. But if there was one scene that actually did affect me in any way, it would definitely be my one-on-one scene with Mrs. Van Dan. Just like they're seeing them get to such a low point in the relationship, just to finally have them kind of come back and just share a nice little moment together was really touching, and it was nice to see them get at least some sort of break during all of this.
You know, one of the ways that this story spoke to me about this time is, of course, what they went through was singular, but this feeling of being trapped with your family and the pressure that that puts you under. And we still go out, you know, we're nowhere near to them, but I could identify with that feeling. Micah, there was a specific question from some unknown person. I can't quite read her name, although I know it's a her, who says, I have another question from me, the beautiful Micah. How did it feel to embody such a person that is underrated in the story? And what was the process who helped you along the way? So I have no idea who wrote that, but just somebody who wrote that. If you can briefly address that and then tell us about a scene.
Okay. I guess it was interesting because it's like, this is probably my second like main kind of background role in a way, but not like a main role. And like, I guess knowing that she was a real person, like you truly have to like get into your head and like do so much research, because as everyone said, that you can't like fake it, or you can't just imagine like, oh, okay, like they're gonna be like sad the whole time, like you just gotta say it this way and that. But oh god, I was not expecting a question. I think honestly what helped me is doing research, and then I would think of like, I would try my best to put myself in her shoes and read through the lines and be like, okay, I'm here helping out 7 or 8 different people that have to stay in an attic for who knows how long. And my job is to bring them their food, update them with what's going on outside, and make sure that I don't get myself caught going to the annex that'll lead to them getting caught also. So I feel like it's a very tricky like role to play, because it's like there's so much that was running through her head, or so much that they were going through, that you just can't like, you just can't be like, oh yeah, I got this 100%. Like, no, like you truly have to like separate yourself and put it in their shoes and try your best to really know like what they were going through.
Maria Alexia, was there one particular scene or moment that stuck with you?
Everything.
I mean, it's a big play and you're in almost all of it.
I honestly, I don't like monologues. But there was the Hanley monologue really stuck with me. It really hurt. It really hurt. I'm a very visual person, and like I might not say much, but I say a lot with my eyes, and like that whole like there is just, Anne has a lot of passages that are very descriptive, and there's this beautiful imagery of these birds and their wings being ripped off, and I really see that, and it's like, wow, it's just so poetic, and I'd never say poetic things, but saying them, I felt like I don't know, like being able to embody Anne. I don't think I have like just a favorite scene, because with every character and every piece of Anne, she was like life that is like, she reminded me of you have to have fun and you have to do these things, and it doesn't have to be just one way. And I think just overall with each character, her journeys like throughout the play was just something that I enjoy doing every time. And I'm so sad that we only get to do it 2 more times. Like, but one of the scenes, if I had to pick one, I can't pick one, because I'm torn between the happy like scene and then a really sad one. Like, I always break down when when there's that part with Allie, it's the nightmare scene when she wakes up and she doesn't want to be taken away. And her mom's trying to comfort her. And it's so sad because I kind of want to reach out to Allie and be like, I want to hug you and I can't. And Anne's not supposed to hug you anyway because she doesn't want you. But then there's that whole conflict I felt very connected to because I've felt like that with my own parents. And I was like, as a child or around Anne's age, I would say something really mean to my mom and be like, she just doesn't understand me. Like, and it's like, and then I would express that to my other parent or my uncle, and they'd be like, you're crazy, never speak of your mom that way. And it's like something that you're just like, I'm just expressing myself. And it was just so raw and so honest that I guess that's one of those that I really connected with. But honestly, the entire experience is just.
Well, it's true. And your character goes all over the place. You have that wonderful time when you're putting on these red shoes and you're playing and you're so much a child. And then you have that horrible nightmare where you turn around and are cruel to your mother. And then not that long later, you reach out to her and say, I want to be with you.
Right. It's like, and that's why I can't really pick a moment because it's the contrast of fighting with Allie and then being like, seeing her throughout the scene where we're not even talking to her, but like start to break down and be like, I just leave me alone. And I'm like, no, I want to be here with you. Or me breaking down and complaining to my parents saying, I just want mother to jump off, going from that to then saying the final phrase at the end of Act 1 and being like, I see myself alone and I don't have my parents with me. It's just really that whole transition. I have to see it as like acts. I don't even know. Like, I can't really pick just one scene.
Awesome. So Alex, let's go ahead and hear from you. And then Alanis, apparently you've had your hand up for a while and I missed it and I apologize for that. I have been corrected by the universe and I stand corrected. So we'll get to Alex and then to Alanis, and I apologize for not noticing that.
The scene that sticks out with me the most, I'm not going to be biased, but it's got to be the ending monologue. And I don't know, it's just like, I guess it sort of tugs on my own personal fear of being the only person left out of the people you love. God forbid, this ever happens to anyone, but you can never truly understand how it will feel to lose your own kids and your own spouse. So it's just hard. It's just hard.
It is. It's hard for anyone, and it's especially hard to ask of young people. I mean, the story of Anne is a story of a young girl, and that's easier to connect with than the story of the father from a young man, or for the story of Mrs. Van Dam, accomplished lady losing her status. I did get this question from a person, Sofia del Cueto Perez. I seem to remember someone like that once, a long time ago, who says, I've noticed Alanis having her hand up this whole time, and I'm curious what she had to say. Hi, my queen.
Aww.
Hi, Sophia. I miss you. What I wanted to say earlier was bouncing off something Alex said about the whole Zoom thing being a weird experience, and it kind of brings me back to the beginning of quarantine of feeling so detached from people, because then going on to my favorite scene with Mr. Van Dam, it was hard to connect with Kevin through screen. It was odd. It wasn't something I'm used to. I'm used to connecting with people in person with eye contact, with, going off their body language in an argument, especially in one of our scenes where I, get mad about him, selling my coat. It was this argument that, I just had to hear his voice and look at a wall and feel the feels. And that took it took a bit. It was hard, but that was my favorite scene to do.
Awesome. Thank you. How about for you, Shalene?
For me, I have 3 entrances, so
Was there a part of the play that stuck with you?
well, yes. It had to be when Mr. Dussel was just in the bathroom, right? But it may sound funny at first, but that's a really important scene.
You think I like spending my life in there? Really?
Exactly. But I think that's probably a very important part in the scene where it's like a man like Mr. Kruger, a very dignified man is scared. And it for me to portray that, like I'm just refined through all the I'm portraying my character throughout the whole show, refined. But then when I get there, and then I have to tell them that, like, you're in danger. Like, if you keep this up, you will be in danger. And previously, I told them that, like, Mr. Dussel has to come in here. Like, every time that my character comes in, it's always snapping the family that's already in the attic back to reality. It's like, you guys are in your own little world, but there's a bigger fish out there waiting for you to come outside, waiting for you to slip up. So for me for my character to feel that, like, oh, I can't help them. All I can ask for them is to stay quiet. I can't ship them off to America, ship them off to any other country that's safe from here. I just have to tell them to be quiet. And not only am I putting myself and Meep in danger as my character, they're all in danger as well. And so I that's one of my favorite scenes, because after that, they totally just break down, and you just see the horrors in their face, especially Mrs. Frank. She just completely loses her shit, and it's like, it's hard. That's me.
Gabby, how about for you?
My favorite scene, I wasn't in it. It's definitely Otto Frank's last monologue, and it's really it's so impactful listening to it, because we just finished the strawberry scene where everything is fine and everything is just, it's strawberries and it's great, and it just does that. And I have to put Margot away so quickly, or else the reaction will just, it'll be like way too much, and I will not handle it. So having to juggle that while also listening to Otto, just, it's a lot, but I love it so much. Good job, Alex. Every time.
That's your father.
All right, Allie, how about for you? Is there a part of the play that particularly strikes or sticks with you?
I have favorite parts. I love whenever Anne is alone with somebody, like when Anne and Margaret are together. That I love. Maybe it's because I'm their mom. I love when Anne and Mr. Deuce are together, because it's like, oh, these two odd ducks, they might be friends, but it turns out no.
There was a
moment, like, just, I love whenever, like, two characters that aren't always together, like not a couple, kind of get to come together and have a little time together. That's my favorite.
Awesome. Danny, I'm going to bring things to a close, but I wanted to ask if you had anything else that you wanted to share with us before we end our evening together.
I'm been listening to you guys, and I just want to thank you all for caring so much about this story and about the roles that you're playing. And I know you have 2 more performances, and I want you to keep something in mind, because part of their story is that they went into hiding. We know the history. We know what happened to them. We know what happened to 6 million Jews in Europe. They didn't know, right? They went into hiding because they wanted to wait out the war, hoping that the Germans would eventually be defeated. And they knew that if they were rounded up, because by summer of 42, the Jews were starting to be rounded up, even in Holland, and sent away. They knew that was worse than going into hiding. But they had no idea what the Nazis were doing with the Jews that were being sent east. They didn't. It's the Holocaust for a lot of Jews has been described as being in constant rupture, right? Your life is in constant rupture. You don't know from one day to the next what is going to happen. And think about that, of being 2.5 years in that attic, wondering, what the next day is going to bring. Is it going to bring that knock at the door? Are they going to start hearing the sirens? Or is it going to bring Meep or Mr. Crawler bringing rations and news from the outside and everything like that? So, and a lot of what you expressed in the last hour, I think, conveys that as well, that you've taken that to heart. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Danny, and thank you, cast, and also Caroline, our stage manager, and Emily Hansen, our digital director. And thank you, those of you who watched. Hopefully this will be up for a while so other people can watch the recording of it, because I think your answers were all really interesting and insightful.
If there's one thing,
yes, go ahead.
If there's one thing I could add, is that I really do hope, most like it's probably unlikely, but I really do hope we get to do this in person. The same
Yes,
time. I really do hope.
I agree. I feel like this play
unlikely, but I really do hope. I really do hope.
I'll tell you just a little story, and then we have to call it a night. There's a documentary on Netflix about Merrily We Roll Along, which is a Stephen Sondheim musical about people in their middle age and how they got to be that way. And when it originally premiered, they decided to do it with young children, like 16 to 25-year-olds. And this was an amazing break for them. And this is their big deal. And the show was a huge flop. And it was sort of devastating. And not that long ago, these same people got together and did the show as middle-aged adults. And they went full circle. So I can't say yes or no to you. I can say the future's out there.
I wasn't thinking that far, but hey, that's even better, I guess.
Make of your future what you will.
And cast reunion.
All right. Thank you all. Thank you for those of you who watched. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all the questions. I know there was a cigarette question about the fake cigarette that we wanted to get to. Thank you all. Good night, everybody. Take care.
Those out of copy paper.